This is what the UFC pound-for-pound rankings looked like at the beginning of 2013. At this point, Anderson Silva and Georges St-Pierre had established themselves as two of the greatest fighters in MMA history, while Jon Jones was climbing the ladder to greatness. I say this every video, but as you can see, a lot has changed since 2013. I'm excited for this video, so let's just get right into it. Here is the complete history of the UFC pound-for-pound rankings. Let's get into it. Renan Barão submitted Michael McDonald, making his way as interim champion to the pound-for-pound rankings. Lyoto Machida got a decision win over Dan Henderson, which knocked Henderson off of the rankings. A random shuffle put Demetrious Johnson ahead of the injured Dominic Cruz. Georges St-Pierre got a successful title defense against Nick Diaz. A random shuffle then put the interim bantamweight champion ahead of the bantamweight champion Dominic Cruz. Benson Henderson defended his title, beating Gilbert Melendez by decision. Jon Jones barely beat Chael Sonnen to successfully defend his light heavyweight title. Cain Velasquez TKO'd Bigfoot Silva to remain at number 6. Frankie Edgar got a decision win over Charles Oliveira. And then the shocker, Chris Weidman KOs Anderson Silva. Silva drops 2 spots and Weidman is in the top 10. Demetrious Johnson submits John Moraga to stay at number 7. Jose Aldo keeps his spot at number 4 by TKOing Chan Sung Jung. Anthony Pettis yet again defeats Benson Henderson, this time claiming the UFC lightweight championship. A random shuffle put Jose Aldo 1 spot ahead of Anderson Silva. Renan Barão TKO'd Eddie Wineland to yet again defend his interim championship. In a close fight, Jon Jones got a decision win over Alexander Gustafsson to remain at number 1 pound for pound. In the trilogy fight, Cain Velasquez TKO'd Junior Dos Santos. And just like Jon Jones, Georges St-Pierre barely defends his title. Very controversial decision win over Johnny Hendricks to remain the champion. After the fight, Georges St-Pierre vacated the title, had a semi-retirement, and dropped from the pound-for-pound rankings. Demetrious Johnson knocked out Joseph Benavidez, the number 1 contender. Demetrious Johnson moved up to number 5. Ronda Rousey submitted Miesha Tate in a successful title defense, but that knocked her off of the UFC rankings. Weidman did it again in December, TKOing Anderson Silva and moving up to number 5 pound for pound. And at the end of 2013, this is what the UFC pound for pound rankings looked like. As you can see, a monumental shift in UFC history as both Georges St-Pierre and Anderson Silva fall off of the pound-for-pound top 5, and Jon Jones establishes himself as the greatest fighter in the UFC. Let's just keep this ball rolling. Let's go right into 2014. Benson Henderson got a close decision win over Josh Thompson, which wasn't enough to keep him on the pound-for-pound rankings. Jose Aldo successfully defended his title against Ricardo Lamas, keeping his number 2 spot. Renan Barão TKO'd Uriah Faber to successfully defend his UFC bantamweight title as he was promoted when Cruz was stripped. Ronda Rousey TKO'd Sarah McMahon to successfully defend her title yet again. Johnny Hendricks won the UFC welterweight championship with a close decision win over Robbie Lawler. A random shuffle put Anthony Pettis 1 spot ahead of Anderson Silva. Jon Jones kept his number 1 spot by getting a decision win over Glover Teixeira. And then out of nowhere, TJ Dillashaw TKO'd Renan Barão to win the bantamweight championship, dropping Barão to number 8 in the pound-for-pound rankings. Demetrious Johnson got a decision win over Ali Bagatinov. Ronda Rousey KO'd Alexis Davis to move up to number 9. Chris Weidman then defended his title, beating Lyoto Machida by decision. Renan Barão had an unfortunate weight cut accident which took him out of the Dillashaw rematch. Instead, Dillashaw KO'd Joe Soto to earn the number 10 spot pound for pound. Demetrious Johnson submitted Chris Carriasso to move up to number 3 pound for pound. A random shuffle placed Chris Weidman 1 spot ahead of Cain Velasquez. Jose Aldo defended the featherweight championship with a decision win over Chad Mendes. Anthony Pettis defended his title for the first time, submitting Gilbert Melendez and moving into the top 5. Johnny Hendricks lost a close decision against Robbie Lawler, losing his UFC welterweight championship. A random shuffle put Ronda Rousey 1 spot ahead of Anderson Silva. Renan Barão got a submission win against Mitch Gagnon to keep his number 10 spot. And at the end of 2014, this is what the UFC pound-for-pound rankings looked like. As we saw, we got the rise of Anthony Pettis, Renan Barão being knocked off of the top pound-for-pound rankings, and the rise of Ronda Rousey. So let's see how things change in 2015. If you liked the video so far, please go down and drop it a like. It took a lot of time to make, and a lot of people have been anticipating it, so here it is, the pound-for-pound rankings. As well, consider subscribing to SBN MMA. We put out a lot of great content, so if you could like the video and subscribe, that would be awesome. Okay, let's head into 2015. Jon Jones successfully defended his title, beating Daniel Cormier by decision, keeping the #1 spot. Anderson Silva got a, at one point, decision win over Nick Diaz. A random shuffle put Robbie Lawler into the top 10 rankings as welterweight champion. Anderson Silva failed the drug test for the Diaz fight, dropping 1 spot to #9. Ronda Rousey got a record submission win over Kat Zingano to defend her title. Rafael dos Anjos put on a clinic against Anthony Pettis, winning the UFC Lightweight Championship. A random shuffle put Robbie Lawler, the welterweight champion, ahead of Anderson Silva. Demetrious Johnson got a submission win against Kyoji Horiguchi to defend his title. The #1 pound-for-pound fighter Jon Jones then got in a hit-and-run accident and was suspended by the UFC. Chris Weidman successfully defended his title by TKOing Vitor Belfort and moving up to #2 pound-for-pound. Daniel Cormier then submitted Anthony Johnson for Jon Jones's UFC Light Heavyweight Championship. Fabricio Werdum submitted Cain Velasquez in Mexico to win the UFC Heavyweight Championship. Robbie Lawler got an amazing TKO win over Rory McDonald to move up 1 spot to #7. In the rematch, TJ Dillashaw yet again TKO'd Renan Barão. Ronda Rousey in Brazil KO'd Bethe Correia to remain at #4. Demetrious Johnson got a decision win over John Dodson to move up to #2 pound-for-pound. Daniel Cormier successfully defended his title with a close decision win over Alexander Gustafsson. But right after that win, Jon Jones returned, moving up to #5 pound-for-pound. Ronda Rousey was shockingly KO'd by Holly Holm, losing her Bantamweight Championship and her top 10 pound-for-pound ranking. And then another one falls as Chris Weidman gets TKO'd by Luke Rockhold, losing his Middleweight Championship. And yet another one falls as the #1 pound-for-pound Jose Aldo gets KO'd by Conor McGregor, dropping to 7th, and McGregor in at #3. To end off the year, Rafael dos Anjos defended his title by TKOing Donald Cerrone. And at the end of an eventful 2015, this is what the UFC pound-for-pound rankings looked like. Just a crazy year in the UFC, Conor McGregor becoming champion, Jose Aldo losing his championship, Chris Weidman losing his championship to Luke Rockhold, Cain Velasquez losing his championship, Jon Jones being suspended and then coming back. Just one of the craziest years in UFC history. But the craziness doesn't stop, as you'll see in 2016. A random shuffle put the championship-less Jon Jones into the #1 pound-for-pound spot. Robbie Lawler got a close decision win over Carlos Condit to become the #5 pound-for-pound fighter in the UFC. Dominic Cruz returned from injury to beat TJ Dillashaw for the title. Dillashaw is now off of the pound-for-pound rankings. And then a crazy random shuffle just moved everybody, Cruz up 5 and Robbie Lawler down 4 spots. Conor McGregor was submitted by Nate Diaz at welterweight. That dropped Conor McGregor to the #8 pound-for-pound spot. A random shuffle put Fabricio Werdum 1 spot ahead of Dominic Cruz. Demetrious Johnson got another title defense, this one by TKOing Henry Cejudo. Jon Jones then got a decision win against Ovince St. Preux to win the interim light heavyweight championship. Fabricio Werdum then gets KO'd by Stipe Miocic. Werdum is out of the top 10 pound-for-pound. A random shuffle puts Robbie Lawler 1 spot ahead of Rafael dos Anjos. Dominic Cruz successfully defends his title, getting a decision win over Uriah Faber. And in a shocker, Michael Bisping KOs Luke Rockhold. Michael Bisping now #9 as champion, Rockhold out of the top 10. And another one drops off as Eddie Alvarez TKOs Rafael dos Anjos. Dos Anjos off the rankings, Alvarez in at #8. Joanna Jędrzejczyk then cracks the top 10 by getting a decision win over Claudia Gadelha. Jose Aldo wins the interim featherweight title by defeating Frankie Edgar, dropping Edgar off the rankings. And And then before his fight against Daniel Cormier, Jon Jones tests positive, dropping 3 spots to number 4. Anderson Silva replaces Jones, and Cormier gets a decision win over Anderson Silva, moving up to number 4. Robbie Lawler is then KO'd by Tyron Woodley. Robbie Lawler loses his welterweight championship and is off of the top 10. Jon Jones is then suspended for his drug test failure and is off of the pound-for-pound rankings yet again. Conor McGregor wins his rematch against Nate Diaz with a decision win. Stipe Miocic defends his title, KO'ing Alistair Overeem and moving up to number 6. Michael Bisping defends his middleweight championship with a decision win over Dan Henderson. Tyron Woodley gets a draw against Stephen Thompson, which means that he keeps his welterweight championship. Conor McGregor then TKOs the lightweight champion Eddie Alvarez to become the first ever double champ in UFC history. Demetrious Johnson yet again defends his title, this time beating Tim Elliott. Conor McGregor was stripped of his title, Jose Aldo was promoted to champion, and Holloway defeated Anthony Pettis to win the interim featherweight championship. Cody Garbrandt got a decision win over Dominic Cruz to win the bantamweight championship and to earn the number 5 spot pound for pound. And at the end of a very eventful 2016, this is what the UFC pound for pound rankings looked like. Conor McGregor becomes a double champion. That was the big thing in 2016 and goes up to number 2, but Demetrious Johnson staying the consistent number 1 pound for pound fighter. He is yet to lose his title. Meanwhile, every other champion is just dropping like flies. Nobody can consistently defend their title. Let's see if he can hold his title for another year in 2017. To begin 2017, Woodley got a decision win this time against Thompson, bumping up 1 spot. Daniel Cormier then submitted Anthony Johnson, keeping his spot at number 3. Demetrious Johnson also kept his spot after a submission win over Wilson Hayes. Joanna Jędrzejczyk got a decision win against Andrade, defending her strawweight championship. Stipe Miocic defended his title for a second time, TKOing Junior Dos Santos. Max Holloway then TKO'd Jose Aldo to win the undisputed featherweight championship of the UFC. Jon Jones for a second time returned to the UFC pound-for-pound rankings up to number 5. Tyron Woodley got a decision win over Damian Maia, keeping his spot at number 9. Jon Jones then KO'd Daniel Cormier in the rematch to become the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the UFC. But not too fast, as USADA caught Jon Jones yet again. He is suspended and off of the pound-for-pound rankings. Demetrious Johnson submitted Ray Borg to yet again defend his championship. In a shocker, Joanna Jędrzejczyk gets TKO'd by Rose Namajunas, losing her title. And then TJ Dillashaw KOs Cody Garbrandt to win back the UFC Bantamweight Championship and is in at number 6. And we're not done, as Georges St-Pierre submits Michael Bisping, winning the UFC Middleweight Championship and climbing up to number 3 pound for pound. In December, Holloway TKO'd Aldo in the rematch to remain at number 4. Cyborg then got a decision over Holly Holm, keeping her featherweight title. To end off the year, Georges St-Pierre vacated his championship, but that didn't affect his pound-for-pound ranking. And at the end of 2017, this is what the UFC pound-for-pound rankings looked like. Georges St-Pierre, he just comes in and screws everything up, as he wins the middleweight championship and then drops it, but still remains as the number 3 pound-for-pound fighter. And speaking of screwing things up, Jon Jones is again nowhere to be seen because he tests positive and drops off of the rankings. Luckily, we have Daniel Cormier keeping things consistent, Max Holloway making his way into the top 5 pound-for-pound rankings. Dillashaw wins his title back, Stipe still the heavyweight champion. Let's see if any of that changes heading into 2018. To start off 2018, Daniel Cormier TKO'd Volkan Ozdemir, moving up 1 spot to number 4. Stipe Miocic defended his title as well, bumping up 1 spot ahead of TJ Dillashaw. Cyborg defended her title yet again with a TKO win, moving up to number 9. A random shuffle put the heavyweight champ Stipe Miocic 2 spots up in the pound-for-pound rankings. Conor McGregor was then stripped of the lightweight championship. Khabib won it against Ally Quinta, debuting in the top 10 pound-for-pound rankings. A random shuffle put both Khabib and Conor McGregor down 1 spot. Robert Whittaker won a rematch against Joel Romero, breaking into the top 10 pound for pound. A wild random shuffle put George St. Pierre down 4 spots and Max Holloway up 3 spots to number 3. Daniel Cormier knocked out the heavyweight champion Stipe Miocic to become a double champion and number 1 pound for pound. Henry Cejudo then knocked off the number 2 pound for pound Demetrius Johnson. Johnson drops 3 spots to number 5. TJ Dillashaw beat Cody Garbrandt in the rematch, TKOing him and moving up to number 3. Tyron Woodley got a submission win over Darren Till, moving up 1 spot to number 6 ahead of Mighty Mouse. A random shuffle put Robert Whittaker out of the rankings and Chris Cyborg back into the top 10. Khabib Nurmagomedov then defeated Conor McGregor, replacing him as the number 2 pound for pound fighter in the UFC. A random shuffle booted Cyborg off of the top 10 and Henry Cejudo in at number 10. Demetrius Johnson then signed with 1 championship, leaving both the UFC and its pound for pound rankings. John Jones made his 3rd return to the pound for pound rankings after finishing his suspension. Daniel Cormier then defended his heavyweight championship, submitting Derek Lewis. Max Holloway got another title defense, this one against Ortega, moving up 1 spot to number 4. Amanda Nunes becomes the 3rd double champ in UFC history, KOing Chris Cyborg and moving up to number 8. A random shuffle put George St. Pierre down 1 spot and Tyron Woodley up to number 6. John Jones TKO'd Alexander Gustafsson to win Daniel Cormier's relinquished light heavyweight championship. And at the end of 2018, this is what the UFC pound for pound rankings looked like. But hold on, we have one more, because in January of 2019, Henry Cejudo TKO'd TJ Dillashaw to move up to number 5 in the pound for pound rankings. And in January of 2019, where we are right now, this is what the UFC pound for pound rankings look like. What a crazy way to end everything off. Henry Cejudo now a top 5 pound for pound fighter, with the flyweight division being in shambles, possibly being broken up because of Mighty Mouse leaving and the UFC just threatening to take it away, yet he comes in at number 5 pound for pound. Khabib Nurmagomedov having a great 2018, winning the title and then defeating Conor McGregor. And you see in the pound for pound rankings, both Conor McGregor and George St. Pierre still there without a title. Daniel Cormier, though, a double champ, loses the championship though, gives it up really to John Jones. Just a crazy year for the pound for pound rankings, everything getting scrambled, but hey, if everything's getting scrambled, then that means some entertaining fights, some entertaining storylines, and that's really what the pound for pound rankings show, is dominance, storylines, just craziness. And you know what, that's why we love this sport. So thank you so much for watching the video. If you could drop down and give it a like, that would be appreciated. I'm considering, and comment if you want me to do this, is doing the rankings from 2008 to 2013. Now, there are no official UFC rankings that I can pull from, but there are online rankings from different websites, different sources, and it's a good history lesson for those who weren't watching the UFC at that time. So if you want me to do those rankings videos, please comment down below and let me know. Thank you so much for watching, and I will eventually see you all again in the rankings.